The end of silent films in the 20s determined the fate of most actresses, which was to be forgotten forever. But Sally Rand was one of the lucky few that was brought back to life by a curious writer. But he soon discovered that her life was covered by a dark cloud of despair and lack of freedom. But who actually was Sally Randi? Sally Rand was born in 1904 in a small Missouri town tucked in the Ozarks. Being raised with music and dance lessons as a child, she ran away and joined a carnival as a teenager, to later graduate to a traveling circus and eventually make it to Hollywood. It was there that film director Cecil DeMille changed her name from Beck to Sally Rand. He thought this name would best fit her after he saw a copy of a Rand McNally atlas. DeMille would soon cast her in more than 20 silent films. But films with sound came along and Rand was gone, because she revealed in a radio interview a decade later that her voice belonged in the Eleanor Roosevelt category. She then decided to go to Chicago to star in a play. Her performance in the play only lasted 1 month. But it was here, sleeping under cardboard in the alleys, that she got the idea to buy some ostrich feathers, take off some of her clothes, and get a job dancing at a place called the Paramount Club. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking: what was or was not under those feathers? The answers are as varied because during her career Sally Rand was at the cutting edge of the early 20th century sensual revolution, because her livelihood depended on people thinking she was naked behind the fans. For this, she was arrested for indecency many times, once 4 times in one day. But it was worth it. Rand even brought her fans to court in August 1933 after being arrested 4 times for performing the controversial dance at a theater in the Loop. Her rise in fame. During the World's Fair, she was also performing at the Chicago Theatre, giving as many as 16 performances a day. Her act was but 8 minutes long but led one critic to write that it was perfectly beautiful, as presented and lighted. Airy, exquisite, and artistic. The critic also added that Miss Rand was so subtle with her fans, that it was hard if you could tell where the body starts, and her fans stop. In 1936, she purchased the music box Burlesque Hall in San Francisco, which would later become the Great American Music Hall. She later starred in Sally Rand's Nude Ranch at the Golden Gate International Exposition in San Francisco in 1939 and 1940. In the early 1940s, Rand did summer stock in Woodstock, New York. She signed on to star in Rain and Little Foxes alongside Carl Malden. He remembered being stressed that she was unprepared and seemed to care more about her costumes than learning her lines, which he admitted were dazzling, to the point that he forgot his own lines during a performance. Her burlesque days were written all over her, especially in her hygiene habits. One could assume she rarely bathed, and the college kids who cleaned the rooms at the Playhouse confirmed that the tub was never used. Instead, she just kept dousing herself with perfume and shoveling on the makeup, layer upon layer, until it began to cake and separate so that you could see the dirt build up in the creases around her neck. In the early 50s, she was traveling with a 17-member troupe around the Midwest, appearing at state fairs and small theaters. Edith Dahl accompanied Miss Rand's famous fan dance, the finale of the show, on the violin and cracked a few jokes. According to local newspaper accounts, Miss Rand's large white feathered fans acted as a guard to keep too much of Mother Nature from showing. The tour was across Oklahoma and Texas, then west toward Washington before returning east. She refused to divulge her age to reporters at the time but was known to be approaching 50. Rand was the mystery guest on the December 28, 1952 episode of What's My Line? She also appeared on television on March 12, 1957, in episode 13 of the first season of To Tell the Truth with host Bud Collyer and panelists Polly Bergen, Ralph Bellamy, Kitty Carlisle, and Carl Reiner. Sally Rand has only discovered thanks to an author. Hazel Grove was the author that actually wrote Sally's biography. But discovering all this information about this long-lost mysterious actress was not easy. Hazel Grove had to go search in the basement of the Chicago History Museum to find something about Sally Rand. Believe it or not, by the time he was looking in the basement, he had already spent many hours upstairs with 61 boxes that comprise Sally Rand's archives. Like a coal miner trying to find a diamond in the dark, he had become fatigued by the letters, the articles, the suits, the divorces, the detritus of any life that has been truly lived. Then, in the basement, he is shown the famous ostrich feathers that Sally Rand used in her act, Hazelgrove then leaned over the 7-pound feathers and took some photos with his phone. Hazelgrove has wisely opted to use only Sally Rand's materials that drive this compelling story, to focus on how her life played out in the unique era of America in the 20th century. Rand lived big and was one of the first to become famous for basically being famous. But for all the flash and feathers and fleeting moments of happiness she experienced, there is an intense sadness shadowing her life. There was a series of lousy guys, bad business decisions, legal hassles, as well as a nasty rivalry with Faith Bacon. After her World's Fair fame, Rand tried to cash in. But the problem of being a cultural icon is that it's almost impossible to define and even harder to monetize. That is why Sally hit the road, performing in almost any place that would have her, and also tried to support her mother and stepfather, and even fell for moochers. She soon went back to Hollywood, but no sale. Rand never reached the dramatic talent that her competitive actress, Mae West, used since she was a little girl. Sally Rand was created by forces beyond her control. One is a manufactured sensual symbol, the other is the struggle under a carnival tent in sawdust and heat. It is fitting that Sally Rand finished out in gymnasiums and senior citizens' homes, while Mae West finished out on Dick Cavett. Rand danced until her 60s. In 1957, Rand appeared on the TV game show To Tell the Truth, and much later on The Dating Game. She talked to Turkle on the radio and any reporter willing and able to track her down. She also received a lasting bit of fame in Tom Wolfe's magnificent 1979 book, The Right Stuff, mentioning Sally when he wrote about the Houston Parade and Arena event introducing the first Apollo astronauts to the world. In the book, she was mentioned as a 60-year-old Sally Rand dancing after a spotlight centered on 2 giant ostriches around her in 2 in the afternoon, as the lights dropped and a band picked up. Sally winked and minced about and took off a little here and covered a little there and shook her ancient haunches at the 7 single combat warriors. It was electrifying. It was quite beyond erotic, show business. Venus de Houston shook her fanny in an utterly baffling blessing over it all. Her final performance came in 1977 at a pageant in the California town of Glendora, in which she had long lived, and which she had purchased back in her spotlight days. She died in Glendora on August 31, 1979. She died in a hospital where she had an outstanding bill for $10,000. Within days that bill was paid by Sammy Davis Jr., who was a long-lost friend of the silent movie actress. When Davis was a young performer on the road, Sally Rand had been kind to him. He remembered. So, he repaid her at the end of her life. Which of these facts caught your interest the most? Let us know in the comments section, and don't forget to check out the next video in this series.